Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the True Safety Podcast, Dangerous Jobs here. And my name is Apolonia Rockwell. I'm your host, and we have somebody really, really special today. Today we have Russ Kane, who is the fire chief of our local Galeton Fire Protection District. Russ, how are you doing this morning?
All right. How are you, Apolonia?
Oh my gosh, I'm doing great. I'm excited just chatting with you offline, and I'm excited to bring our conversation to the public. You do so much for the community, Russ. You do so much for your district, for the state, and I'm super excited to talk to you, and I'm excited to get more into your story. I don't think everybody knows exactly who you are, the behind the scenes, and just kind of your story on how you got into safety. I have a million questions about what you're seeing on a day-to-day basis and how we're going to tie that all into safety. But first of all, tell us about how you got into safety. How did you get here? How did Russ get here at this department here?
Well, it's ironic. I was adopted by my grandparents when I was about 11 years old back in New Jersey, and my grandfather and my whole family worked for General Motors. And my grandfather worked at General Motors at night as a tool and die maker for the body shop, and during the day he farmed. And so he had that dual occupations. You wouldn't see him. He was always in a pair of gray or green workman's Dickies. And this is years after he retired.
Yeah.
This is what he preferred to wear,
Yeah.
He wasn't unique except for the fact that he farmed during the day, but that was most of the uniform of working class blue collar New Jersey.
Absolutely.
And we happened to be part of what used to be the Garden State. There's probably 250 homes where I once called my home, and our farm, if you will, and areas that we farmed. But I can remember when he retired, and he had just adopted me. And as a tool maker over 38 years, you start to bring home quite a few of your own personal tools from your shop at work. And he did so. And the first thing I saw was this big gang of locks and tags. And this was 1978. And I said, Pop, what's that for? He says, it's so the foreman doesn't kill you. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He says, if you don't lock out those devices that you're working on, they're going to come down and say, what's wrong with this machine, and cycle the machine. And he's seen people injured and hurt.
Yeah.
So, that was my first exposure to industrial safety. Mm-hmm. And there were certain tools that I couldn't use by myself. I was constantly in a state of education on hand tools and carpentry tools and things like that. And there were certain saws that I wasn't allowed to use without his supervision. And but there was plenty that he taught me how to use. But everything was about safety. I wore safety glasses constantly when I was working around chisels and anything that would throw materials. But he was an example of a successful, I think, or at least a burgeoning safety culture that was out of General Motors.
Absolutely.
And he brought it home,
Yeah.
And he had seen men killed, and on numerous occasions. He also was poisoned with toluene diisocyanate while he was making standard body shop poisoning, and I remember him going through that, and his body had a irritant reaction to it, and it became an allergen for him.
Wow.
And so. All of these things that, before I went to school, before I chose my occupation, because I went to school for environmental planning and design at Rutgers University.
Okay.
At the same time, I joined the local volunteer fire department at 15, so I was still doing that stuff. And we had the natural thing was, to hire an environmental health and safety manager at a small industry or chemical plant. Mine happened to be chemical plant. Mm-hmm. And then you learned about the side that you had the deficit from your academics in. So environmental was strong, but safety safety. I had to learn, I had to sit down with, 29 CFR 1910 for general industry, and I have to sit down and immerse myself in that to properly do my job. And I had a great mentor who went on to become a vice president at Sun Chemical.
Oh, wow.
And the first day I met him, he had a tool belt. He was a graduate of NJIT chemical engineering. He had a tool belt and he was covered with dyes from one of the machines that broke, and said, "You're going to need a uniform, lose the tie, and we're going to go out and do some work." And that was a wonderful first year in the business.
Oh my goodness.
And it was right. It was right there. And he had said to me, he said, "The reason we hired you was you're not the best student." And admittedly, I was not. And he said, "We got guys with far better grades in here, but you speak in full sentences, you make eye contact, you're big, you know how to use tools, and you've been trained as a firefighter, and our plant catches fire." It was 23 or 26 minutes after I started the job, the plant had a lead chromate explosion. And luckily there was no injuries, but it did have a lead chromate explosion. And it was, I was like, "You guys weren't kidding,
This is no joke. This is no joke. And this is
right.
First day on the job, first week on the job, you're dealing with this a catastrophe, or not a catastrophe, but something major right off the bat. And so what was I'm so interested. So then what was the safety culture like? That word safety culture, what it meant now versus what it meant then, and what it looked like then. So what did it look like at that facility?
Well, I think there were hints of a safety culture that was building.
Yeah. And
I think it was for the same reasons my grandfather's was, because they had seen people disabled and injured on the job, and no one ever gets rich from that. I mean, it's a terrible, devastating thing. And people may get compensated or partially, fractionally, but they're never going to enjoy that miracle, that people fake car accidents for.
Yes.
It's a taking when you get injured on the job. It's serious. And so that what we saw was there was not a lot of nuance with compliance. There was very practical. We handle flammable liquids every day: acetone, toluene, methyl ketone, and we don't want to be part of an explosion or a fire. And in the back, in the dry section, they handled, flammable and combustible dusts on a routine basis. And they didn't want to have those episodes because the business folks didn't want to have an interruption of production. And of course, the average worker wants to go home in one piece like everybody else.
Yeah, yeah.
And there was a lot of education. And again, I looped my grandfather back into it. My grandfather had, before he became a skilled tradesperson for General Motors, had worked in the body shop in the 1930s. And in those body shops, they used lead filler to take care of, they would use hot lead to actually do body repair. And my grandfather became exposed and lead poisoned as well. Oh, yeah. And I can remember running this first lead, we were above the action level for lead, and I ran the industrial hygiene portion of it, training and tried to look for different ways to reduce the lead exposure to our folks. We also ran the medical program, which ironically OSHA limitations at the time were 10 times higher than public health backgrounds. So we'd have to deal with the public health inspector occupationally because they were worried about children getting children being exposed in the household. And so we had to let them know they were in part of an industrial managed program. And so I started, talking to my grandfather, who I still lived with in my early 20s, about, lead and zinc photophosphorus and those type of things. And he goes, "Have them drink milk." I go, "Whoa, wait, where did this come from?" Right? And then he goes, I go, "How do you know about this?" And he's like, "Oh yeah." He says, "Let me see." He says, "Oh, these are really pretty high. You got to get these down. This shows long-term lead." I'm like, here's a guy I used to just drink coffee with all day and he smoked cigarettes for a while. Yeah. And I'm sitting here and he just tell me how to do it. I'm like, I said, "Tell me all about this." He goes, "Well, the doctors at the plant said," and he took that to heart. And I think anybody does once they're educated in the why, right?
Yeah. Yes.
That's. I mean, Simon Sinek makes it. It made it famous, but the why has been a part of education for a long time, right? So, so I just, again, going back to my grandfather, and so that plant was probably where I cut my teeth on things like bonding and grounding, flammable liquids handling. We also handled nitrocellulose. We were a Hercules certified handler of nitrocellulose or gun cotton, because your nail polish is made up of about 30% nitrocellulose.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it still is or not, but it was at the time. That and pencil lacquer. If you take a look at like a Dixon No. 2 pencil, that's all nitrocellulose lacquer.
Oh my gosh.
Which the less flammable part is the methyl ethyl ketone.
Yeah. Well, this is wild that this is your first experience. This is your first, big kid job, and you have a ton of responsibility like this. And what's so interesting is your perspective on safety is so practical. I can hear that, coming through from your story, is that, you didn't go maybe the traditional educational route where somebody just gets their safety degree and then they're, this was ingrained in you, and these real life stories, these real life applications have always been with you. And so then getting your feet wet with this first time job, you gained a tremendous experience on the safety side and the employee side. You see the boots on the ground, how they react to new safety policies. It's different than it is now than it is back then. And so then where did your career take you after that? What did that experience really teach you about people and safety? And then what was your next journey after that job?
Well, like all young professionals, I was, number one, I wanted a paycheck that didn't bounce, and that had happened.
Got it.
Imagine a chemical, somebody who has all sorts of federal licenses and permits bouncing paychecks. And so I just started to look around. And at the time, in the late 80s, early 90s, everybody was getting on board with having someone to manage their environment and health and safety. And I took a job with an organization called Carry Chemicals. And that relationship lasted from 1990 directly as an in-house employee, and still doing some work for them, over the phone and conversationally, all the way up until 2022. For 3 generations of family. And, they had inside folks and everything else, and they just from time to time would need some troubleshooting in later years. But that was one of the formative years. We had a plant that was probably 150,000 square feet, rail operations, tank farm.
Yep.
And they had and what happens, and I could say that there's a 3-year curve to a lot of industries, a lot of small industries.
Okay.
They'll hire the safety person or the environmental person based upon the last compliance inspection or episode that they had.
I agree with you.
By the way, it's human. It's nothing more than human nature, right? And so they'll hire that individual, and they'll bring them. That individual will get them to the 80th to 90th percentile.
Yes.
And then some financial issues will hit, and they'll cut corners a little bit and either make that person leave or that individual. And again, it's, you hire somebody fresh out of school. Odds are they're not going to be with you in 3 years.
Right.
I mean, it's something that might have to be embraced or looked at. And you lose that institutional knowledge when they move on, right? And so, you spent 3 years and walking that plant. And that plant was a polyvinyl chloride wire covering manufacturer, basically insulation on wires. And then they did other things like, for example, some of the floor mats in industry or floor mats underneath your chair for the rollers so they don't mess the carpet up. They made they made the materials for that. And they made the materials basically for, wire and cable covering. And then There's a variety of other things that they've branched out to, boot soles and anything that's PVC, rain gear, that type of stuff, flexible PVC. And then there was a rigid side, and a rigid side made construction profiles, just like the framework for windows and things like that you see, plastic replacement windows and things like that.
And a lot of injuries at that plant, or that was it was a little bit different?
And this is a theme. This is a theme that has been through all my association with chemical, even into oil and gas. There's very few chemical exposure issues at these plants relative to back injuries and practical safety issues, forklift problems and things like that. And I would say it accounted for less than 1% of the issues.
Wow.
The chemical side of it did, although the compliance side of that was tremendous. And of course, your training is you don't want to you don't want to have people sick or anything like that. So you want to make sure that you train people to properly handle the materials, to properly use their PPE, use their engineering controls, and in that hierarchy, and do those things correctly. And so there's a lot that went on to that. A lot, again, another facility that used lead, a lot of industrial hygiene in there, lead, barium, at the time chromium, and these were usually additives for the material, less than 1% or 2% of the material, and so. But they still had to be managed. They're on the OSHA Z table, and they had to be managed according to any chemical specific standards and/or basic permissible exposure limits and TLVs and time weighted averages and things like that. And so and some had a medical requirement like lead, where you have to monitor the workers at some frequency. Yeah. And when I first took over, we had 25 people in medical monitoring. By the time we got done, we had, I think, 1 or 2.
Oh my goodness. So then what was the culture like? I mean, that probably ebbed and flowed. I mean, just hearing about what you're talking about, and I don't know how big the safety team was in addition to you, but I mean, what was everyone's mindset?
The key is that, the safety team has to be in supervision.
Yeah.
It has to be ingrained in supervision to be successful. And we had some plant managers that were very curious and all about learning and how to do things better. And then we had people who rejected it all the time and only did it because of the chain of command and the authority being pushed upon them by upper management. So, and those are old school folks, but you also had old school folks that embraced it too. So, and you knew the difference between the supervisors, and they started to get evaluated as part of their evaluation in this particular plant is how many people do you have in a lead program and why?
Oh, wow.
And they started to take a piece of their cash for that. And so, and I thought that was appropriate. It wasn't too popular.
Yeah, I can imagine not. But I've seen that interviewing, talking to people, clients, whatever it is. I've seen when managers or operations are incentivized with having a different perspective of safety. And like you said, safety needs to not just be a safety department. That doesn't make any sense. But when safety is a part of everyone's responsibility, but then it's measured, then there's the other pieces that it's measured. And, if there's raises or anything like that tied to how well do you execute a safety program, and you're an operations manager, you're going to have a better chance at executing that safety program. So that makes sense. And then, okay. And it's interesting too, just hearing you say the majority of the injuries, no matter the plant, no matter the industry, it went back to the basics. And it was those types of injuries that were most common in that plant, back injuries, sprains, forklift things, property damages, stuff like that. And so that is interesting. And I find that universal, right? And so, so then how did your perspective change when it came to safety, when it came to executing a safety program? Did your techniques change? Did anything Did anything like that
Well,
for you? Was that different when you left?
in order for me to learn the job, I actually, I put on a jumpsuit and I started to, work a shift or two at each position.
Oh, that's amazing.
With people, and I learned about it, and I'm like, why is this? And we could figure out why certain people had, for example, lead exposure problems. Mm-hmm. Because they would ingest lead accidentally by biting their nails. They'd take their gloves off and bite their nails. And so, or they were smokers. They wouldn't wash and they'd go outside and smoke. And if you want to smoke, fine. But there's a cost to putting your fingers to your lips in a chemical environment, See,
there's that practical side coming out again, is that, hey, to be the best safety or environmental, whatever, compliance coordinator, I needed to be what I just heard you said is I worked. I worked alongside. Yeah. I spent the time with the people, and that's how I learned how we were ending up in these scenarios, in these safety sensitive scenarios. So that's so interesting. Okay, so anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but
if you come in on third shift and start working with people, and you do that. Third shift is always, or the night shift, or whatever you want to call it, right? Yeah. They're always the redheaded stepchild, right? And you come in and you say, right? But you know what? They're also some of the most productive workers and people that can be left alone without a lot of soup. And it's just my experience. It's all anecdotal, but that's been my experience. Your third shift folks just want to be left alone at work. But when you pay attention to them, when you include them as part of the group, they respond very well. Mm-hmm. And whether you're working beside them or just coming in to chat with them a little bit in the lunchroom, and in a fixed facility, that's really a benefit.
It goes a long ways.
It does. I mean, you'll get a call the next day. Hey, I just got up. I want to tell you about something last night.
Yeah.
And it's really good stuff. And there has to be an inherent level of trust. I mean, and I can remember one kid I had a real issue with. He was a day shifter, and he had he never wearing safety glasses. Never, always the little things, right? And he managed to spill some creosote-based chemical on his skin.
Oh wow!
And if you've ever had that happen to you, there's a burning sensation. And then there's and usually like a first degree welt that'll be left on you. And he didn't follow his PPE requirements for the position. And he was genuinely scared because he read then the MSDS, now the SDS.
Yeah.
And he read about, the Dre's test and the effects and possible skin cancer and things like that. And he was completely frightened that he may get, like I said, I had to explain cancer risks to him and carcinogenic risks, and it's not necessarily it's going to happen tomorrow or it's going to happen at all. It just could happen, and so we had and after that he was locked on with wearing his PPE, and he was maybe 21, 20, and and he would always be mouthing off. And
everyone has that person or those people in the company. Yeah. And he was I don't know, I was 23 or 4. I wasn't much older. But he, I said, look, I'm going to get you to the doc, and he's going to explain the risks, and we'll get this. We'll get you settled down on this issue. I said, but this is why I tell you to do stuff. And so. He's like, yeah, I get it now. It's like, all right. And we went, he went on and I went on doing my career. So, and not all the time does an employee obviously experience that, right? Where they finally get that awakening moment, and thank goodness nothing severe happened to this gentleman. It was something, minor, and he had that learning lesson. But for the employee that is maybe that old school mindset, or maybe they are the 21-year-old that's at the company and they're just fighting safety. What have you found from your experience? what is the best way to manage that situation? Because you have a lot of either safety professionals or ops managers, and they're wearing all the hats, right? They're safety, they're ops, and they're trying, let's say they're just trying to take their safety culture. They're trying to take that culture to the next level this year, but they have some of that old school or whatever that mindset is. What have you found that is the best technique to attack that or approach that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a combination of education and discipline, right?
Yeah.
It's like I'm going to tell you the proper way to do this. We're going to educate, and we're going to have a conversation, and I want you to really understand that why. I really do. But I'm going to be there to make sure you do it. And if you don't, there's got to be a consequence and change in behavior. And we all know our different improvement programs or disciplinary programs, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
But you have to be. And it's something I learned in California working for Cal Fire. There's quite a few inmate crews there, and the best successful inmate supervisors were firm, fair, and consistent. And these are people who work on a fire, and that program's kind of going away because of different policies in California. But they had about 3,000 firefighters that would go where the bulldozer didn't. And how do you manage somebody who has a chainsaw, 2 chainsaws? And how do you get them to do that type of hard work?
Yeah.
And you're firm, fair, and consistent with them. And and that was something I did not run those crews directly. I had interactions with them, but they watching the most successful supervisors. That's all people want to know is the rules.
Yeah.
They want them applied consistently and fairly to everyone. And people want to be respected regardless of what their stature is.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
In that inmate crew, and that's what I'm saying. They just want to be respected, and that tends to work. I mean, not always, but that's why you have the hammer, and you may have to let people go. That's just the way it is. But as long as you're firm, fair, and consistent, I think 90% or at least 80% of folks will respond to that.
I agree with you. I definitely agree with you. I oftentimes, I've never talked about this on a podcast before, but oftentimes I get employers that call, and whether they're clients or not, but I get this same question of, hey, I have a bad egg. And we don't talk about this a lot in safety or in the private sector, is that, hey, I have somebody that's constantly fighting me. What safety program can I put in place, or what program will solve this? What's like the solve all? And now I'm like, there is no program to weed out bad mindsets. And when you're fair, what was that a line again?
Firm, fair, and consistent.
Firm, fair, and consistent. And you are already doing those things. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, you will have to part ways with somebody that just doesn't get it. Like, you can't policy out a negative, bad egg. You have to remove them because they will be cancerous to the team, and something bad is going to happen all the time with that person.
It could be your best technical person.
Yes, and they often are. And then there's and some of those folks also understand the art of hostage taking. Yeah,
and they take your business hostage.
Oh my gosh,
it's a terrible thing for them personally, I think.
Yeah.
And I look back in self-reflection of, myself ever been that way. And certainly I probably have.
Yeah.
Those type of things, think of yourself at 24 or 25 or whatever, how differently you think now. I mean, whether you're 57 like I am, or I think you're under 30 in Forbes. I think I'm going to guess you're around that age, but but you're younger than I am, and the younger self, if hopefully as you age, you're looking at your younger self and saying, I am seeing it in other people, right? And the good and the bad.
Yeah.
So it's just an evolutionary process.
Yeah, and being and that respect piece too. I love how you said firm, fair, consistent, and treating everyone universally with respect. The same respect that you would treat the supervisor as the new hire, as the owner, as that just goes a long way. And I love that perspective. I think that you can't go wrong, right? And one thing I want to go back to and honor you for is just your connection to the people piece. I hear you. A lot of people and questions I often get too is, how can I be more successful or influential as a safety professional at my company? Like people hate the safety department, or they hate me. Yeah. What could I do to be successful? And I think you answered just that in the show today, is get to know the people and get to know the work. Yeah. And that with the respect and how you're treating everyone at the company is going to go a long way, especially when you're enforcing tough programs, programs that will change a way somebody does work. But the way I want to end this, Russ, is I want to ask you what you're really excited about right now. What projects are you working on? Or, it could, and that's super general. That could be with the department, that could be in life. What's important in your life right now? What's exciting you?
Well, I mean, the department is my passion, and we've 5 years ago we came in and stabilized and put a good, consistent, basic response package to an area that deserves it, and I could say that a lot of rural America isn't getting the care that it needs.
Yes,
we've been blessed with oil and gas, and we manage those resources very frugally and responsibly to impact insurance rates and the moral obligation of making sure that grandmothers get cared for or grandfathers get cared for within a reasonable amount of time with a good response option. I think that we're reorganizing again. We're kind of going at different plateaus, and we have now a consistent supervisory package. That's exciting. We're getting to train 2 brand new supervisors, and as such, our goal is to have 30 volunteers. We're somewhere in the mid-20s. We're training 7 right now.
Oh, wow.
Going right from this meeting.
Wow.
And while a lot of rural America is hurting for volunteers, we seem to be doing very well. And I think that's the inertia that we create in training and energy. And we're a developmental fire department. Fire and EMS. EMS is 50% of our job. And it's probably the most impactful to anyone's life.
Absolutely.
And we take a lot of pride. Our values are safety, service, and work. Safety, meaning that we're here for the safety of the community, which includes ourselves. We can't help anybody if we're disabled. Our service is, there's nothing below us. We'll go down and help unclog the sewer plant several times a year. That's and that's what it's about, and it nearly religious values in that sense. And then there's work in our community. Whether you're working in the oil industry or you're working in the ag industry, this is about hard work. There's no quiet quitting here. Yeah. There's no this is about dirty blue collar work.
I love it.
And staying in motion for 8 hours a day of your 24-hour shift, whether that is training to be better at what you do, or that's taking care of all of the public investments, or doing things for the community. And we like Galeton and our communities, Barnesville, and those historic communities. And we like being part of that and part of that energy. When some of that energy, just by dynamics in society, have moved off the farm, if you will. And so hopefully we can bring some of that energy back.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm excited about our next step, and I'm always excited about developing young professionals. We have placed about 50 personnel in full-time jobs since we've started in other places.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. Those are incredible numbers. I mean, wow.
And I just pinch myself the problem is we're always doing it because we're turning them over, right?
Yeah,
it's going to be hard.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and look, anybody who employs people understands that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But your best ones are always challenged to keep them home, but sometimes you don't. So,
oh my gosh.
So we design a system that's resilient to turnover. Okay. So that's and we do our best with that.
Too, something you mentioned made me think of this is on a practical level, how important it is that small businesses, large businesses, that we connect with our local fire departments. That's one thing on a very practical level to take away for listeners today is, have you contacted the local fire departments in your area where your employees are exposed to? Because, our clients being in the Greeley base, Weld County, but they're working in these rural areas and these job sites that the fire departments don't just know where we're at, what hazards we're exposed to. I mean, that was go ahead.
And a lot of times they're not addressable. They don't have addresses.
Yes.
We've been very fortunate as far as our ability to find things, and I think it's important that we exchange business cards before there's an emergency.
Oh my God. Yes.
And one of the challenges with the oil, for example, oil and gas, is that there's a lot of dynamics within those large organizations that may take one person from one geography to another, and so you might not see them. So you have to refresh those contacts. I mean, I have a set of contact cards here, and we're involved with the CPRN, the Colorado Preparedness and Response Network, which is a great way of plugging in. But that's just big oil. But we have ag entities here that, we have 5 dairies, and I have everybody in speed dial on those dairies. And so, we all come together as a community, whether it's a snowmageddon and we need help getting our trucks pulled out, or they need help on something, and we can get them a service and taken care of, quickly. And it's always good that, there's a part that, the relationship, and I don't want to be romantic about it, but there's a very pragmatic part about being relatable to people and understanding, who you're helping out.
Yep.
And it's just been, and that's, the door's always open here. We're not a extraordinary regulatory body. We're more of a practical, we'll help you type group. We do, there are certain things we do regulate and have to, be firm, fair, and consistent with, but there's far more that we do from an educational perspective. I think we had done some work with you at 4X a while back in 1888, and that was just great, having a group of people there sitting on truck bumpers and chairs and just talking about it as practical blue collar folks. And so
absolutely,
so get connected. I mean. And it's one of the challenges between, the academics that, unfortunately, a lot of our academic institutions send people into the field with an air that's unrelatable. And we need to stop that. Yes. We need to get it back down to earth and take the science and get it to the people if it's going to be any good.
Yes.
And so that's it.
Your common theme, you are so practical. It makes me so happy. I think, talking to so many safety professionals or just people in this industry, we could get caught up in these theoretical programs and, you're very to the point. And I think the biggest takeaway, there's so many takeaways from today's conversation, but one of the big ones is getting connected. And that is every single person, no matter where you're listening, it is vital that if you are ops, safety, owner of the company, it is important that your company is connected to your local fire departments, or at least where your employees are exposed to working on projects, remote locations. Get connected. I love what you said. You would love, you heard it from the fire chief himself. You would love to exchange business cards before an emergency, and the better relationships that you can develop with those local fire departments, the more successful that you will be in case of an emergency, in case something happens. Your chances increase to protect your employees are there when you have those types of relationships. So I really really, really appreciate your time today, Russ. I know you're so busy, and I just want to honor you again for everything that you're doing for our community. And I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Is there any final thoughts here?
No, just thank you, and it's great to work with you again. And I look forward to working with everybody in the area, and we'll have fun. There's no excuse for a small town fire department. There's no excuse for not contacting them. They're very relatable. The bigger the fire department, a little more difficult it's going to be.
Sure.
With a lot of runs and stuff. But
Yeah.
we're here for you. Give us a call, and we'll do our best to stay connected. And if you're working in this area, stop in for a cup of coffee or a bottle of water, and we'll just at least exchange those business cards, right?
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Thank you for that opening. Thank you for that open door. We'll go ahead and link, for those listening that are local, we'll go ahead and link up that contact information to Galeton, to this unit specifically, so people can have that first point of contact and not be so afraid to approach you guys. So thank you so much. And we will chat again soon. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.